I don't know.
Like
If the sand starts breaking down,
it gets
a little bit
slightly
more?
smaller, and then it's like
that'd be interesting. And then it's a faster.
well, and it shifts by like 0.5,
Yeah.
0.05 seconds or something.
All right, let's start this thing officially.
All right.
Boom! It's Hot Mike. I've got Nick Holland in the studio. He is a writer. He's a comedian. He is an Antifa leader, and we are happy to have him in.
An Antifa leader.
Oh, right.
Wow.
I thought I read that in your bio.
No,
I'm just kidding.
That's no. I'm in the mask.
Okay,
so.
You're on the other side. We all want to know, what was it like at the Capitol that day?
Oh my God! Just blindside me.
I'm just kidding, man. Really, what I want to talk to you about was I got to see your set from last weekend at the Comedy Fort Collins, and I know you told me you're with confidence. It was one of your best or favorite sets you've ever done. I can definitely say you crushed.
Thanks,
you
man.
really had a connection with that audience, and I loved what you did with 14 minutes.
Yeah,
roughly.
I think the last one I did was 14 minutes. I got to do the opening weekend for a touring comic, and so and I was trying to rotate through the material, and then so the video I sent you was of the second set.
Okay.
On Saturday night, and so it was the third set of the weekend, and so I felt like, and then so you want to slip in a couple extra minutes because
yeah,
you're just swinging for the fences. At
well,
that point,
it seemed like you had momentum going into that set, as if like almost that you were warm.
Well, and it's cool to. It's like, I mean, the Comedy Fort is a great room for comedy, and I actually that weekend was the 1 year anniversary since they'd opened, so that was kind of cool. And
Wow.
and they'd started at like a smaller capacity and have been scaling up capacity as restrictions have changed and everything. And so and both the shows on Saturday were sold out, and so it was like it was full, and people are energetic, and it's interesting because the room is so sweetened that it's like probably easier to achieve laughter there in the room, because a lot of the other places you do comedy at, random bar shows or open mics or something, it's like you're fighting a little bit more tooth and nail to hold people's attention and get laughter, and then so you go to this place that is like where a bunch of decisions in the architecture and arrangement of the place, let alone the fact that people are paying a ticket and planning to go to a comedy show, at a comedy club, and so it's like. So you're really primed for success in material that you've honed and refined, in more hostile or more difficult rooms, and so that's kind of a cool. There's like a weird. I feel like stand-up feels kind of funny in that way, right? Because it's like, yeah, it in some way it almost gets a little easier, but then the tournament system or how you get to those easier spots is brutally difficult.
Yeah, What would you say your favorite night of the week is to perform at the Comedy Fort specifically?
Well, they have every week they have open mic night on Mondays. That was the same open mic night that Hodie's Half Note had for like almost 11 years before Hodie's went out of business at the beginning of the pandemic. And so it's really cool, and that's where I'm most used to performing.
Hodie's.
Hodie's is now the Comedy Fort.
Yeah.
But it was like this one room, and they had this open mic there on Monday nights that I've been doing on and off since like 2011. So it's also this crazy, this total head fuck of like continuity of, you go like, oh, I've been coming here to do this thing in this room
Yeah.
from time to time, like for over a decade,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But then I'll say that, yeah, sold out Saturday night with the. So this was a highlight on some level because of how successful, that room is in making people excited to see comedy and focused on comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes, because you wind up doing shows or open mics where, like, there's a TV playing in fucking Sports Center,
Yeah.
and so you're, like, competing with Sports
Highlights of the day,
Center.
highlights of the week.
And
Yeah.
So I mean, this was.
It keeps the environment geared towards laughter, humor.
Yeah, I
like,
mean, they've done a beautiful job. It's a dark room. The only thing that's lit up is the stage, and they.
Pretty low ceilings.
I mean, it's higher ceilings than because it's Hody's, so it's still high ceilings. So
Never
I guess
been.
if you could,
I didn't know that Hody's was like what it was before the fort.
And before it was Hody's, I guess it was, and this was before I lived in Fort Collins, but it was like the Starlight Lounge or something. It was a club that did mostly like metal shows, I guess.
Wow.
At some point. And so,
Okay.
it's like this.
Like more in the 90s?
I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
that's my understanding. I mean, because
Wow.
I moved, I don't know when it became Hody's,
Yeah.
but I moved up here in 2007, and Hody's was Hody's
Okay.
at that point. I saw a bunch of different bands and rappers and metal bands play there over the years. And
Did you see comedy there?
Yeah. I mean, well, and so they had that open mic, and
Yeah.
then occasionally there'd be local shows, but there weren't like.
Did anyone come through?
There weren't like huge touring
Okay.
performers that I was aware of, and
Yeah.
actually, David Rodriguez, the guy who owns the Comedy Fort, the guy who started the Comedy Fort, he had actually done in the years leading up to the Comedy Fort. He'd started booking comedy shows at the Aggie, and some big names, and so like Todd Barry and Hannibal Buress and Brian Posehn, and so like some people that.
So all big names.
We're all aware of, came and played the Aggie. And so that was a super cool.
Was this Barris before he exposed Bill Cosby for what he was? Because I know that was a changing point in his career.
It might have been post.
Was it?
I saw Hannibal Buress play the Funny or Die Oddball Comedy Festival at Red Rocks in like 2015.
Okay.
Weird to watch stand-up comedy at Red Rocks, but kind of cool.
Yeah.
But Burris was doing, as his part of the set that year, he was doing stuff he had a bit about Bill Cosby.
Okay.
And how we all knew. And so I watched that bit before it became like
Totally.
a ubiquitous internet thing.
Yeah.
Ironically, though, also on that show was also headlined by Louis C.K.
Uh-huh.
and Chris Hardwick was on it, and so like Whitney Cummings, not Chris D'Elia, but Whitney Cummings was on that show.
Uh-huh.
So it's just a funny like.
It's a great lineup of comics.
It's a great lineup, but some of those guys have
They've taken some
aground,
hits.
Yeah, there's been some cancellations, and so it's just like, so it's a funny testament to being like, oh shit, 2015 was actually a while ago, culturally,
It was.
and both time wise.
Yeah.
It's like I'm sure you have that where you think of things from like the teens, the 20 teens.
Sure.
And you're like, oh yeah, that was just a little bit, and then you look at like all of the things that have changed culturally, and yeah, and then it is actually, it's like, oh yeah, 7 years. I guess that is a while.
Well, to talk about your set, and I was very impressed at kind of how you structured it, and I know
Thanks, man.
We've kept in touch in the past few months as you've led up to this particular opportunity, and how much you're really working out on your material, and it really shows. That's what I wanted to say, and I love the structure and the build. Like you start in one tone and you end in a completely different place, but you brought us along this journey, and to do it in 10 minutes and the ground that you cover, you can tell that it's crafted, like, and it's well crafted.
Well, and I was saying this, right before you hit record, but it's like, I think comedy, and especially comedy now, because it's brought in so much influence from storytelling, and there's so many like really popular representations of comedy that are like very much autobiographical comedians, and I'm just another boring white guy in northern Colorado, so I'm pretty sure that, like, at this point I'm like, I don't think anybody particularly needs to or is that interested in like hearing my story or really get it. And so I returned to comedy. I'd done comedy like the first couple times super young, did it a little bit in like 2009, 2010, and then 2011 through 2014 in like my early and mid 20s I was really into it. And I was doing more of that, like, storyteller, kind of trying to riff on things, comedy. And then I stopped, and, I drifted away from it, specifically because, like, I stopped drinking. And so, and it was like it was a culture that there's a lot of drinking.
Yeah.
And then I restarted again, really in like 2019, and because couldn't stop like writing or thinking of jokes, kind of like while I was driving in the car, processing my day, and there'd be things where you go, oh, no, that's just a joke.
Yeah.
Not really anything else. That's a joke. And then so I started and was doing it somewhat in 2019, and then got to take another year off, like most people, in 2020.
Yeah.
And then, and the club opened right at the beginning of 2021. And so I was like, yeah, I'd be really, really stoked to take another whack at this. And because I think that, like, boozing and being in my early 20s and all that kind of, and so I felt like I hadn't really taken the whack at it that I wanted to, which was of like, I want to just write and tell jokes. And I still feel like that, that we are in a cultural moment where maybe writing and telling jokes is like a little impersonal to people too. But I felt like in the material you saw, it's like I got jokes that are peripherally about my lived experience or worldview. It's just not right up front. And I personally too, from like the theater background and acting in short films, it's like I think it's very interesting to leave aspects of my identity ambiguous through the set, so that I can kind of like, play with people's expectations or understanding of me, and also like tweak that from joke to joke.
Yeah.
So that sometimes I'm very like deadpan or incredibly self-deprecating or a little aggressive.
Yeah.
And that until you tell the audience, oh, well, I'm this certain way and know this about me, they're left to decide that for themselves, And so for the sake of like, what's funny about this sentence, what are I really like thinking about the humorous mechanisms at play, And it's like, what is it funny because it made you see an image in your head, or is it funny just because of wordplay, or is it funny because somebody sets up a problem and then they explain it to you and they take like a very different tact. It was weird after last week. I had to accept. I was like, oh, I think my best current jokes are about, and the most developed bits are currently about Jesus Christ and fucking robots.
Yeah.
And so those are weird, and you go, well, the jokes find you, You know, you can't always you can't always find the jokes.
Yeah.
A lot of times the jokes find you.
Mm-hmm. I think what you were saying about is it funny if then, like, if you boil that all the way down to just is it funny, what you were describing around the autobiographical. Now, if you tell a story about yourself and it's fantastic, it's great, and it's got a great close to it, and you've got it hits in multiple points of the story, that's amazing. It's funny. But I feel like what you're talking about or describing is, I just don't consider stand-up comedy.
Well,
it's stand-up. You're standing up and you're talking to people, but clapter is not laughter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like, it's interesting because, and I ironically, you know, for his pretty far fall from grace, I think some of the modern conventions of, like, the stand-up set as this super autobiographical, woven in and out of material, I feel like Louis C.K. is somebody
who's one of the best,
who established a lot of that. But now, and I think, yeah, because I talk to other comics, and so people know me and they'll know that I can at times talk a fair deal of shit about autobiographical comedy. But when it's done well, and when it's been tightly written, and it's like, and if you listen to somebody, if you go listen to, you know, somebody like John Mulaney or something, who has a very, like, personal kind of, you know, a very, like, warm kind of, seems like he's inviting you into his life, and he's explaining things, and but it's also like, and you're kidding yourself if you don't think that that's been very carefully written, dialed in material. Yeah. And so I think one of my biggest grievances maybe with autobiographical stand-up comedy as, like, the current dominant form, other than clapter, because I would tend to agree with you. Applause is not laughter. Applause is something you typically feel obligated to participate in, whereas laughter is like an involuntary physical reaction. Response, you know? And so one of them is in that way much more true than the other. But it's like, I think my biggest grievance with it, though, is maybe that it, like, lowers the barrier to entry on some level, because you get a lot of people, and I say this again as somebody who's primarily an open mic comedian, but it's like you get a lot of people who show up really just solely with the basis of being like, oh, well, you know, all my friends say I'm so funny, and I got all these great stories, and these people are just gonna fucking love me.
They're gonna love me.
And I think, you know, and I say that too, to be totally honest, it's like, I think that on some level, I probably did think that when I was in my early 20s, first trying comedy. And so it's a very, like, forgivable, earnest mistake. And then I would say that, like, then the rest of my 20s, I found to be incredibly fucking humbling. Yeah. You know, and, like, I wasn't the most unique little bright light in the world. And that, the arrival of that clarity, you know, brought me back to comedy in such a way where I was like, I just want to be fucking funny. Yeah. You know, like, and I'm gonna write, I'm gonna carefully think about these things, and you know, and you hope that your comedy is distinct. You hope your comedy is distinct just because you're the one who wrote it. And I think everybody and every other comedian I've met and talked to, I think everybody starts out trying to write jokes like their favorite few comedians. Yeah. You know?
It's not a bad starting point if that's your only starting point. If you weren't born Sam Kinison, and, well, Sam Kinison wasn't born Sam Kinison. He had to have massive head trauma, and then he became, so terrible example. But
and seminary.
You know, he was a preacher, right?
Yeah.
Well, to what you were saying about, so the storytelling, if it is a style and you've mastered it, and we know several top tier comedians who are just great at talking about their own lives, I feel like where it's lost on lesser comedians, and now I'm not a comedian, so how dare I critique
You can
in
dare.
such
You can
a
dare.
scathing way. One thing that I hate hearing is, I swear to God, this is true.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
they keep coming back to it as if that is important at all.
Well, and I find that super limiting, and I'll say that too, that I've seen comedians on several different levels. You know, because I get to see a lot of like touring comedians, and I know some comedians who are touring comedians who are based in Denver, and then a lot of amateur and other open mic kind of comedy enthusiasts such as myself. But it's like, I think a lot of people burn a lot of energy on like the preamble of their stories or jokes, and of justifying lies or assuring that their true stories are true. And to me, kind of the thing I'm perpetually struck by is, it's like, that is so unimportant to the audience.
Yeah.
Actually. You know, that there are some things that comedians say, and, you know, I record all my sets at the open mic, and then you go back and you do listen, because some of the times you show up with, like, something that has been very tightly written, and other times you show up and you're like, I'm pretty sure this is funny. You know, like, I know that, and that's the thing about the fitness of it. You know, and I've talked to met in passing various guys who have fought MMA at different levels or something, and there's a lot of comparisons and overlap to stand-up comics. And all the MMA guys go too. They're always like, "Oh Jesus, that seems so brutal. I don't know why you'd ever choose to do that. Why would you ever do that? Yeah, you know, like, you're like, how do you'd ever choose to do that to yourself?" And I was like, "Well, you know, the punches in the face are just purely emotional. You know, it's purely emotional punches."
I love how Daniel Tosh drew attention to the fact that he doesn't give a shit whether this is anchored in truth or not. One of my favorite lead-ins to a joke is, he says, so my girlfriend is Asian, for this joke. And then he goes into the joke. And I'm like, I love, and that gets a big laugh. Even before he goes in, he's like, I have no qualms in, like, showing you. Exactly. I'm showing you my hand. Like,
even that, well, and it's this weird thing too, because it's like, even I feel like it becomes more startlingly apparent some of the times how much artifice there is to comedy when people are trying to sell you that there's not. Because the instant I take a story, let's say this is a story that's true about my life. The instant I take it and I polish it, and I do it on stage a few times, then it's artificial.
Yeah.
Even if it started out in something, you know, I actually did once. It was like professional development day, and there was this guy. I probably shouldn't say the name of the band, but it's extra funny if I do. So it was a guy from the Flowbots, and the two guys from the Flowbots had come up and were doing our like professional development day at the public library.
Yeah.
And one of the guys told this like long, like sad, heart-wrenching story about his family.
Yeah.
And like, and it was, you know, moving, and there was these various examples of rhetoric and everything. And then though, like, and it left a little bit of and it was inspiring, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth, because I was like, I wonder, because he said something, and I heard him say something in passing to somebody after the speech, that he had like a graduation booked for like the next couple days.
Yeah.
And so I was like, and this was in the spring, and so that he was going to go do a high school graduation sometime soon. And so I was like, I wonder how much money this guy makes off of that heartrending family story every spring. You know, like, it's like, does he works just like I might work
as a performer.
My 15 minutes of jokes. This guy has this heart-wrenching tragedy that has like a thoughtful, warming ending. And he's shilling that thing.
Yeah.
You know, he'll do that at your fucking Rotary Club. He'll do that.
He's like,
he'll
it pays
do
the
that
rent.
to an old folks home. He'll do that to a professional development day. He'll do it to a graduation. He'll do it at a fucking funeral if if your check clear.
This story is money in the bank.
And so it's this weird thing because I'm like,
yeah.
because I go, having always been a skeptic and a shit talker,
Mm-hmm.
So I go, I'm like, well, to me, that feels faker than my comedy set
Mm-hmm.
of clearly artificial written jokes.
Yeah.
Because, like, I'm not going to shed a tear. You're not going to shed a tear. And I'm doing enough things, like, in the setup and delivery of those things to allow people or remind people to be real with people
Mm-hmm.
that this just isn't off the cuff. That this isn't like, that I didn't make it to the pulpit today
Yeah.
and open up my heart to the white light and this is what I have to testify.
Yeah.
And so I find there's a funny, and a lot of these people are great comics, and so I understand why they do it. But there's a bunch of comics who are operating on a higher level than I am and are people out of Denver, and they're in relationships like with another comic.
Okay.
And they'll frequently, and I get this too for like saving gas money, but they'll get booked on shows together in
Okay.
other places.
Yeah.
And then they'll both wind up having jokes about like my partner or my spouse or something.
Uh-huh.
And they don't cue anyone in.
Does the audience
to
know
being
that
like,
they're...
well, like, I'm a
course not.
comedian, and so
Uh-huh.
I know because I know
Sure.
like the larger social
Wow.
circle. And I know these people on Facebook, or I just have seen them around enough times to be like, oh yeah, those people are engaged. Oh, those people
Like-
are married. And then they do the sets, and they have these jokes, and obviously, right from your life. And so I'm not criticizing that they do this, but it's like, so they have these jokes, my husband or, my
you're
wife
like,
says.
You're talking
and
about
it's like,
him.
it's that person, and there's like this way where you could stand up in the screen. She's talking about that guy we saw 5 minutes ago. It was a guy right before her, and they never allude to that. And it's like, because it's unnecessary information to the audience, and it might hinder, and it's almost like an in-joke, oh, they're married to each other. And maybe it would hinder the audience's freedom to laugh.
Yeah.
If it was like she's telling this scathing story about her husband, and it's weird, I saw that guy 5 minutes ago,
Now you can put a face to the
so it's
story,
like,
and that's
well,
not
and so
necessarily helpful.
It might, cause
Uh-huh.
some people to have like a halting reaction or something. But to me, I'm like, well, that proves that autobiographical
doesn't.
material is just as artificial
Yeah.
as jokes that clearly sound like jokes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think the ones who master this, they just make their jokes and their storytelling, it's better if it's coming from their personal experience. It's almost validating if you're like, I'm telling you this because it happened to me, and I'm so good at telling you the details that are important to make this the funniest or the most uncomfortable that it can be, that it's better in a framework. Like, yeah, Louis C.K. probably has 10 hours of stage time just talking about how horrible his shits are.
Yeah.
And it's like drawn from real life, but then he'll create a story around it that's, who cares whether
And
it's true or not?
This iteration
Yeah.
of his shit humor.
Not just what it's like to have irritable bowel syndrome, but also to have 2 little kids that have to go into public restrooms with you while you're
Right.
dealing
Yeah.
with your terrible digestive issues. Like, he's able to frame that up in, I'm a dad, I have terrible lifestyle habits that lead to this, and I can't stop myself. But I'm going to tell you in this neat little package that's like, here's a little day in the life.
And, and all of the things about it that make it autobiographical, it's like they make it able to see more clearly.
Yeah.
And I will say that in the structure of the set I sent you, it was like I did intentionally, it's like I do try and sprinkle in details of my life or apply this like structure of like, oh, these jokes sit well together. Now I'm talking about like relationships, or this is part of the worldview, and so
or you just bought a kettlebell and you've been slinging that thing around.
There's a lot of intention into how to stitch it all together, and some jokes like suggest that they be put right next to each other, and some jokes it's like, oh man, I got to put these on like opposite sides of my set.
Yeah.
Or have a few buffer jokes in between, sometimes because they directly like contradict the reality of one another.
Yep.
And that's I think I'm thinking about it maybe a bit more theatrically than some of the other comedians I meet. I feel like a lot of comedians want to be perceived the same on stage as they want to be perceived off stage. And I feel like that's like hamstringing yourself.
That's true.
I think it's an interesting, and I feel like too, I've said this to you before about comedy, but it's like, I think that, over here, there's this version of how other people see me. And they're able to see things about myself that I can't see. They get their, they make their first and second impressions of me or whatever, however I strike them, in ways that are good, ways that are bad, Over here, I have my understanding of myself, where obviously I'm probably a little bit more sympathetic, give myself the benefit of the doubt, maybe more than some of these other people. And then I also and so I know some secret version of myself, or myself more comprehensively, maybe, than what other people are seeing. But there's also ways that I'm deluded, or ways that I'm wishful thinking. And then so comedy, especially stand-up comedy, maybe more so than any other creative format I've lived in, is creating and performing material from a space that draws from both of those imperfect understandings of the self. Because you're trying to write material that on some level exposes more of your inner reality, and also plays into or capitalizes on other people's understanding of you, which is crazy head fuck.
That is.
And I think that's why so many people are so drunk to do stand up. At least for the first pass, I think I spared myself the scrutiny and the utter head fuck of the staggering subjectivity of my own reality by just being kind of drunk and stoned and bombed on Klonopin most of the time. And now I only have weed, and it's a much thinner blanket or buffer. I'm far more prone to being like, oh, whoa.
You don't want the fog to be too dense.
No. And, because alcohol gives that, like, that super high momentum kind of thing.
Sure.
It's like you're just tumbling down a hill.
It is, yeah.
And weed is far more of a drift.
Yeah.
And so the idea of, like, communicating information in a timely, punching way, marijuana has a capacity to be like a real enemy to that,
Gotcha. Well, Nick, you are a very funny comedian.
Thank you, man.
A talented comedic writer, and I want you to keep performing, keep writing, because I like what you do.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
All right, Nick. We'll do it again soon.
All right.
And, is that stand-up available yet? Or are you going to keep that?
I'm keeping it under the. I mean, you can follow me on Instagram. At Kick Holland, and that's a good place to keep an eye on shows.
That's
Kick
Holland.
Kick Holland. At KICK.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
And then I have like a real short. I've got like a 2-minute set from last summer up on YouTube.
Okay.
If you search Nick Holland at Jokecella.
Yeah.
And so that's that's a few real tight jokes.
Yeah.
That I feel comfortable being ubiquitous in the world.
That's
sitting
awesome.
on the rest.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I'll attest that at Kick Holland is the place to find Nick. You get to see all his other art showcased. Very multifaceted, multimedia artist. So check him out. Kick Holland. Thank you again, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, man.
All right. Keep comedy funny. We're out.
Nice.
Nice, buddy.
Nice.